All right, Crim 1, here we go. So, I thought I already had this open here, but, yes, I did. Good. So, this is Chapter 7, and Chapter 7 is the one that's taken me forever to get through already because there's just so much interesting, cool, and important stuff in it that it's taken me forever. So, I'm going to pick up where we left off. As opposed to starting from the beginning, because that would be like an hour-long video for you to hear basically half the stuff that I've already said in class. So here we go. In fact, I know we already did this slide too. We talked about Tennessee versus Gardner. So I'm not quite certain if we got to this slide, and in fact, I don't think we did, but you'll see here a case from 2001 where it indicated qualified immunity, meaning officers under specific circumstances cannot be sued for their actions. So things like trying to resuscitate someone and save their life, things like that, drag them out of a burning car, stuff like that is probably going to be things that they would not get sued for. Does this mean that they're not going to get sued if they shoot and kill an unarmed man in an unjustified shooting? No, they can get sued for that kind of stuff. So anyways, continuum of force, or the use of force continuum. A lot of times we will talk about this thing. It's like a list, like an order that they expect you would take when considering using whatever tools you have in order to combat whatever the issue is. So I don't even know if that made any sense, but use of force. How much force is needed to control the particular situation that you have? So this is kind of like this is the continuum of force. A lot of people will think that you have to go through every option before going from officer presence, you'll see the green arrow down to the bottom, to deadly force. That is not necessarily the case. So if if we're all sitting in class, back in the olden days when we used to be together in a classroom, and someone comes in with an assault rifle and points it at you guys, do you think an officer has to come in and say, "Stop, wait, don't shoot," and then they have to get their pepper spray out first and try and take him down with pepper spray and wrist locks, and then maybe use his baton and maybe a taser, and then get to deadly force, meaning his firearm? No, if someone walks in and points a gun at you, an officer is going to pull their gun out and shoot them. They're going to go straight to deadly force. However, the use of force that's needed, the level of force that is used should not be more than what is necessary. If you're trying to arrest a kid for stealing a pack of gum, you should not be using deadly force unless the kid has a gun pointed at you. Makes sense? So the force should be appropriate for whatever the situation is. So these are the different levels of force that officers can use. And honestly, officer presence, just being there, just having an officer present can be considered a use of force, because people will sometimes stop what they're doing if they see a police officer there. Sometimes they have to give those verbal commands, stop, show me your hands, things like that. Soft techniques like pepper spray, come along, which is, it sounds kind of silly, but it's kind of like a wrist lock, a control hold where you would basically hurt someone's wrist in order to get them to comply. Then you have hard techniques like strikes, takedowns, tasers, batons, and then you have, of course, deadly force. If you have a baton and you hit someone in the head, that would be considered deadly force also. So it's not just firearms. So there's a bunch of different areas where laws and rules, I should say, regarding the use of force policy. Every law enforcement agency is different. And it is your responsibility not only to know the federal laws, not only to know the state laws, but to know the policy according to your department. And trust me, if you don't know the policies and something goes sideways, your department's going to throw you under the bus as quickly as they can and try and say, well, this is not part of what we have taught this person. So it can become real challenging for an officer. Sometimes you just kind of get thrown to the wolves, for lack of a better term. But anyway, so you have to consider when you're using force the laws, federal and state, plus you want to consider, well, civil law too, so that you don't get sued and lose everything you own, but you also want to consider your use of force policy, your department's use of force policy. Really important for you to know that. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so generally African Americans experience the use of force more than whites or Latinos. Use of force is closely related to the dynamics of a is closely related to the dynamics of a situation, I should say more closely, than to a citizen's personal characteristics. But we do see a lot of these use of force incidents being against young Black men. It is unfortunately a very, very common thing. Pursuits. You've all probably, I don't know, maybe you haven't seen a police chase. It used to be that police officers would go on high-speed chases and follow people for miles, going 150 miles an hour. That's probably an exaggeration, but after a decent number of innocent civilians got hit and killed during a high-speed chase that had nothing to do with the chase, they just happened to be in the area at the time the chase took place. Most agencies, for fear of hurting people in the public, innocent citizens, do not often participate in chases. So they do, depending on the nature of the offense. I mean, if you've got a serial killer who rushes away or drives away in his car really fast, you might chase him. If you've got somebody with a warrant for not having a valid driver's license, you're probably not going to chase that guy. It's not worth it. The risk to the community just isn't worth it. Okay. Drug enforcement. Yes, marijuana is the most used illicit drug, although it is legal, sort of, in California now, meaning if you are over 21, you can use marijuana at home for recreational purposes. This does not mean that your employer has to let you do that. So a lot of people will say, well, it doesn't matter if I smoke marijuana. It's legal now, so I can still get hired as a cop and smoke marijuana. No, you cannot. You will not pass a background if you are smoking marijuana. So please stop. If you are, if you're not, good job. If you ever have, it's not the end of the world. Just stop. But drug use statistics, of course, marijuana is the most common. Methamphetamine has become really common in our area here in the local San Joaquin Valley. And of course, it is associated with a lot of criminal behavior. Other drugs that are common in our area, I started seeing heroin come back just about when I was leaving probation in about 2015-16. Oxy, of course, cocaine still out there, Molly, what's this stuff called? The cough syrup stuff. You all know what I'm talking about, the cough syrup stuff. Promethazine. But enforcement strategies are aimed at trying to keep people from bringing it into the United States, stopping drug sales, and stopping people from actually making drugs at home. Enforcement strategies have been largely ineffective. That might be something that might be on a quiz, I'm just saying. Similar levels of drug use exist among whites and African Americans, but African Americans are more likely to be arrested for drug offenses. It might be something else that might be on a quiz. Police do engage in drug prevention efforts. Obviously, we've failed pretty hard at drug enforcement. Race, class, and gender. I'm not sure why that picture was in there, but okay, gangs. You know what gangs are. We know what gangs are. We live in Fresno, so we definitely know what gangs are. I'm sorry, I'm watching some people walking their dogs out in front of my house. Okay. Gangs, groups recognized as such by themselves or others with a history of trouble with neighbors and police. They are found mostly in urban areas, meaning in the big cities, although we see a lot of gang activity in our small towns in our valley. They sometimes distribute illegal drugs, mostly stable, not mobile in their membership, associated with organized crime entities. And we're talking about probably the Nuestra Familia and what's the other one? MA? Yeah. But the gangs in our area now have become pretty active in human trafficking as well. So they used to make the vast majority of their money on drugs, and I think now there's a lot of money being made by local gangs from human trafficking. And I did see this at Hoover. Had a few students that were involved in human trafficking. They'd go out over the weekends, make a bunch of money, come back, and then recruit other girls on campus. So it was great. That's sarcasm. Again, we live in an area where a lot of gang activity is. So Fresno PD, I'm sure you're aware, has, the gang task force. Pretty much every local law enforcement agency has a gang task force because we have so many gangs in our area. You've heard Jerry Dyer used to go on making his public statements that, we're after you, Bulldog Street Gang. We're gonna shut you down. And to some extent, when they go in and they have their task force go out and heavily enforce the law, sometimes the gangs will move. And typically, we always used to see this happening in Fresno. They would go to Sanger. So we would chase them all out of Fresno for a little while, and then Sanger would have a boom in gang activity, and then Sanger would chase them out, and then they'd come back to Fresno. And so anyways, so you're familiar, I'm fairly certain, with gangs because we got a lot of them here. Intimate partner violence, another really, really, really common type of criminal behavior that occurs everywhere, but assault on a person with whom the attacker is intimately involved. So it happens in rich people, poor people, black people, white people, old people, young people, you name it, it happens all over. And it's been an ongoing problem, and it continues to be. So the tough part is that it's really, really hard for the suspects to be prosecuted because, unfortunately, oftentimes victims will choose not to prosecute or not to go forward with their complaint. So that sucks. Working with those victims at probation was rough because one day they would want you to arrest their significant other, and the next day they want them out, and so it was very frustrating. I think we're coming up closely on the end. Because there have been so many horrific incidents where police would go to a home, think they had the issue resolved without arresting anybody, and then end up going back hours later when one of the subjects killed the other one. Some new laws were put into place where officers were required to arrest one or the other or both subjects when there is a domestic violence call. And this is still in effect now, and it has helped, I think, save some lives probably. But again, real tough one to deal with. Stress, yes. I'm guessing y'all can relate to stress right now because we're all living in this insane time when nobody really knows what the heck's going on and what's going to happen next. But stress does affect home life. Imagine what the police are going through. With our community, the people in our community are, probably freaking out, a lot of them, because we're in some real unprecedented times and we're dealing with issues in our community today that we may have never seen before. In fact, I'm sure we haven't seen before. So female officers and officers of color tend to experience more stress, partly due to discrimination. Officers witness and deal with extreme social problems that are difficult to forget. Obviously, I remember my dad used to come home and tell me the stories about, horrible car accidents or suicides or anyway. So uh, think about how much police officers have to deal with on a daily basis as far as stress is concerned. How do they deal with it? Well, hopefully they deal with it in a way that is productive. A lot of them will do things like go to the gym, which is, again, kind of a problem right now because we are in the middle of the coronavirus shelter in place order. So all the gyms are closed in the state of California. So they also can cope with stress by having good relationships with their families, and just basically having another outlet that doesn't involve police work. Unfortunately, a lot of times officers are going to go to things like alcohol and drug use, unfortunately, to deal with the stress. And it's tough. It's tough. A lot of them, there's kind of the stigma as far as mental health issues are concerned that they will not seek mental health services because they don't know how that will look to others in the department. Which is obviously, it's sad, but they have excellent access to mental health services, but I would be willing to bet they don't necessarily use them as much as they possibly could. So, but having a healthy support system, diet, exercise, venting their feelings appropriately, like don't go home and beat your dog, and seeking out a change of focus and positive feedback. So these are some things that the officers can do. Some things that the departments can do is train better, give them good feedback, have good communication channels, have opportunities for input, and active support of stress management programs. These are their dog tags. Okay, cool. And that's it. We made it through chapter 7 finally. So I'm going to prep the quiz next. And we're going to talk a little bit about it. My thought is just to have the quiz due in, let's say, a week, and not do a study guide, but not put a time limit on it. So I don't know. That's what I'm thinking right now. So we shall see. Stay tuned.